And we're here today because, one, it's Earth Day, so happy Earth Day. But also we're really thrilled to be partnering with the Switches On for Heat Pump Week, as well as San Francisco Climate Week. And so I'm so excited to be introducing the star of today's session, Shreyas Sudhakar. He's the founder of heatpump.org and Vayu, a heat pump installation company based out of the Bay Area. He's a former rocket engineer, a mechanical engineer, and a licensed California HVAC contractor. So he knows heat pumps inside and out.
Thanks so much, Helen, for the intro. And if you're here today, you're probably here because you're sold on upgrading to a heat pump, or maybe you've just started thinking about it. You're kind of on the fence. You don't know where to start. And sometimes it might feel like you need to be a rocket scientist to figure this stuff out. But the fact is, there's a lot of confusing jargon. You probably have heard a lot of acronyms. You've probably found a lot of conflicting information. Our goal today is to help guide you and be that map that lets you get from where you are today to looking like this guy and happily having a heat pump installed in your own home. So our goal today is to get you that toolkit to be able to confidently go forward with the next steps in this journey. And I know I noticed that there's also some real heat pump enthusiasts and experts that are in this call as well. And so this presentation is going to be largely homeowner focused. So if you're a homeowner in the Bay Area, you're thinking about getting a heat pump, you're in the right place. And even if you are a heat pump enthusiast already, if we have time in the end, we'd be happy to kind of dive into some more technical and nerdy questions too. But first, we want to really focus on the basics. And there's a lot of this information. Some of it you might already know, but we're just going to start assuming you're just getting started in your journey. So you might be here for a lot of different reasons. Maybe you're here for climate. It is Heat Pump Week. It's Earth Day. So that might be your motivation, getting a big polluter out of your home. Yeah, your space heating, your furnace, is typically the second largest emitter of carbon emissions in your lifestyle beyond your car. And so it is a really powerful lever to decarbonize your home. But you might not even care about any of that stuff. Maybe you just want to add air conditioning, or your furnace is 15 or 20 years old. It's getting close to the end of life, and you want to be proactive and install something that will last you a long time. Regardless of what your motivations are, there's a lot of great reasons to switch to a heat pump. And I often get a lot of questions or gotchas from people, and there you might run into an electrician that says, hey, you don't have enough electrical capacity on your panel to get a heat pump. Or people might say, oh, you need to insulate your house first before you can get a heat pump, or else it won't work right. And a lot of these objections we've found sometimes can be true in other parts of the country, but especially in the Bay Area with our relatively mild climates, we're usually able to make a solution that works for most people without having to add a bunch of add-on projects. So most homeowners can switch to a heat pump without having to do a bunch of other work to prepare them for that. So in terms of that's kind of the why, let's talk a little bit about the what. So the first thing to think about is how your house is currently heated. So you might have ducts, and we're not talking about the things that quack, but piping that hides behind your walls and shoots air throughout the house. And so if you have little register vents throughout the house, and hot air comes out of those, you have a ducted system right now. And there are options that work for that. If you don't have those vents, there are also options for heat pumps that can work in that type of house too. So let's talk about those ducted systems first. There's kind of four basic parts to a heat pump. So one is the indoor unit, and that goes where your furnace is right now. So if you have ducts, You probably have a furnace in an attic or a closet or hiding somewhere away in your house. This box will go right in that same spot. Then you'll have an outdoor unit. If you already have AC, this will go in usually in the same place that AC already is. If you don't, you'll find a place outside the house for that. Then there's all of the little bits and bobs that connect these together. There's piping, there's electrical wiring, there's the connection to the ductwork. And when it comes to the installation itself, a lot of making these connections actually is where the hard part is. And lastly, there's the thermostat. That's how you control this thing. It's very similar even if you don't have ducts right now. So the outdoor unit and that infrastructure is largely the same. But instead of having a big indoor unit that connects to all of your existing ductwork, you can have little wall-mounted units like this one in each room of your house. And these usually don't have thermostats in the same way you're normally used to. Usually they have a remote control like a TV, and often they have an app that you can control everything from your phone as well. So that's the what. Now let's talk about the how. Like how do we go through the journey of actually buying a heat pump? So I'm gonna if we have a map and we're trying to navigate it, the best thing to do is to have a guide along that journey. And for most people, that guide is going to be the contractor that you work with. And so your goal with finding a contractor is finding someone who can understand your home, make specific recommendations for you, and has the technical knowledge and expertise to help guide you through this journey. So the first place to start is sizing. So heat pumps, when they're sized well, can be incredibly comfortable. And the reason is because unlike a traditional furnace, they're able to match the amount of heating and cooling that your house needs at any given moment. So if it's the early morning and it's really cold, they can ramp up to a high level and deliver a lot of heat. If it's midday and the sun is shining and it's pretty comfy, they'll ramp down to 20-30% of their capacity, and they'll just constantly match how much heating and cooling is needed. But to be able to do that effectively, the system actually needs to be sized appropriately. And so many contractors still use outdated rules of thumb. And so they'll just make an estimation based on the square footage of your house and say, this is the size your system needs. And the reality is every home is a little different. You have different insulation, different size windows, and all of that can lead to a different unit that is actually best for your house. So you might hear things called manual J or manual S. If a contractor mentions those things, that's a good sign because it means that they're actually doing calculations and math instead of just winging it. And some of the most sophisticated contractors will actually take your home's historical electricity bills and gas bills and use that information to figure out how much heating and cooling your house actually needs. The other thing that's probably what you're not used to is usually when we're going to buy a product, we're focused a lot on the brand. And so if I'm like, I want a new Toyota, I'll go out and I'll go to 3 different dealerships and I'll get a quote for a Toyota and I'll compare those and I'll buy the cheapest one. With a heat pump installation, that installation is so much more important than the brand. So what's most important is that you're getting the right heat pump for your house, and the contractor has done all of the right sizing and the calculations, and during the day of the installation, they're following all the best practices to make sure that will last for a long time. I always tell people I would much rather have a budget heat pump that was installed well by a trustworthy contractor than a high-end name brand system installed poorly. And I guess if you think about it with the car analogy, like you could have two Toyota Camrys at used car dealerships, and one is in great condition and the other one has been really badly worn and really worn out. And in that case, maybe a Kia would have been a better option for you anyway. So finding that contractor, finding that installer is one of the most important things you'll do on this journey. Some things to keep an eye out for. those sizing practices, like we said, if they're saying that they do those things, that's a good check mark. If they're a heat pump specialist, that's also a green flag. A lot of contractors, heat pumps are just one of many things they do. They also do plumbing and they do insulation and electrical. And what that means is they don't have the time to focus on all of the little details and have the knowledge to really guide you. Some great places to start. The Switches On has a great contractor finder. Ask your friends and families. A lot of utility programs have lists of qualified heat pump installers. So those are some great places to start. When you're evaluating your quotes, keep an eye out for permits. And if you run into a contractor that tells you that they're not including permits or they don't recommend you getting permits, that's a big red flag, because like ultimately, like from a contractor standpoint, like getting permits is a pain. Like there's a lot of paperwork that the contractor needs to do. They have to make sure that they coordinate everything on the inspection, but really it's a protection for you as the homeowner. It means that someone independent of the company is going to come and check their work and make sure everything is set up appropriately. And so it's really important that when you choose a contractor, they're a contractor that is including permits. And by law, all heat pump installations are required to have permits, but a lot of contractors skip this step. There's a lot of great opportunities for incentives and rebates with heat pumps. So a lot of local utilities have rebates. The state of California has an incredible program if you're planning to fully electrify your home. A lot of cities have local rebates. So you can, in many cases, you can stack multiple rebates together. And often a new heat pump installation will be less expensive than a traditional furnace and air conditioner. And then be careful when you are evaluating a quote, because the final number probably isn't the best number to optimize for. As we said, reading these quotes can be really confusing. There's a lot of different line items. There's a lot of text and legalese, and it can be really confusing. So a big part of going through this journey is going to be feeling out that contractor that you're working with. What are their capabilities? What is their experience level with heat pumps? Are they doing those calculations that are really important? And also be careful that the number that they're providing you is all inclusive. Sometimes contractors will say permits are not included in this cost. Other contractors will say, you're on your own to get the rebates. Here's a link to the website. Good luck. While other contractors will guide you through that process, fill out the forms on your behalf. So it's important to kind of think about everything involved in the proposal and not just the dollar amount. So what does a heat pump installation actually look like? Typical projects are usually 2 to 3 days. This can vary a lot based on your specific home, but usually the first day we'll have some prep. They'll remove your existing system in the first couple hours. Keep in mind that you won't have heating until the installation is completed. So it's important to plan ahead, get some space heaters out of your closet if you have them to tide you over in the meantime. Then the actual installation, there's a lot of manual work. So they'll be connecting the unit physically to the ductwork if you have it. They'll be running the refrigerant lines that connect the outdoor and indoor unit. There's just a lot of piping, wiring, all of those things that will be happening over those next 2 days. And at the very end of the project, the installer will come, they'll pop the thermostat on the wall, they'll start it all up, and if everything works great, you have your beautiful new heat pump. I'm so excited to see like so many of you on here because like heat pumps are really the future for California. California is moving away from gas. There's some new rules coming into effect in the Bay Area and other parts of the state, which will make gas furnaces obsolete after a couple years. And so really like a heat pump is a great way to future-proof your home and make sure that you're setting up for the future. So if there are three things that I could have you walk away with from today, number one is that contractor you work with is going to be so important. So finding the right partner for this journey, finding that guide is probably the most important thing that you'll do along the way. Remember that properly sizing a system is really important. If a contractor isn't really telling you how they're selecting the system for your house, if they're not telling you that they do manual J calculations or use your historical utility bills, that's a red flag and something to keep an eye out for. And quotes can be confusing. There's a lot, sometimes it feels like it's intentionally made to confuse you. So like the important thing to take away is like keep an eye out for those details that are important. Avoid simply comparing on price. No need to fixate on the brand of the equipment. The contractor that you're working with is far more important than that. Yeah, I know there's a lot here. There's a lot of great resources to continue this quest. We're just kind of scratching the surface here. The Switches On has this great contractor finder. You can check that out. We've put together a guide which covers a lot of the topics we talked through today in more detail. So that's here at guide.heatpump.org. It's super digestible. You can share it with your friends. We're also building a quote guide. And so we'll share that soon. And that has a lot, that will have a lot of information about how to read these quotes, how to compare different options from contractors and know what you're actually getting. If you want to get like more like super technical and nerdy, I write about like the technology, policy, and from a very like more informed deep dive standpoint. So you can subscribe to my newsletter at heatpumped.org. That's also a great way to stay tuned for future content from us, like that quote guide. And so that's what we have prepared, but like I really would love to hear all your questions because I know we really just scratched the surface here, and I'm sure you have some things that you haven't, that you came here looking to get answered. So I will hand it over to Helen. If you could drop your questions in the chat, she will kind of triage them.
Perfect. Let's go ahead and get started with a couple that we already have in the chat. The first question is from Rita. She is a HVAC contractor, and she's planning to build an ADU and was considering a heat pump for that unit. She's also thinking of getting a heat pump for her own home, but she's wondering if she does that, does she have to take out the gas furnace for home heating and cooking?
Great questions. So ADUs are a great application for heat pumps because you're building a new system, new home from the ground up. Usually they're relatively small square footage, and you can use the mini split type heat pumps without having to add all of the infrastructure for the ductwork. And so if you're building a new ADU, mini split heat pumps are usually a really great option for that. And one or two of those units can very effectively cover an ADU space and be more cost effective than installing a lot of ductwork. And they can also provide some targeted comfort in that space. In terms of a home heat pump, you don't necessarily have to get rid of your gas furnace. Generally, when we install heat pumps for our customers, we usually recommend that they do, though. And the reason for that is because the heat pumps are most efficient when it's the full package, and the outdoor unit, the indoor unit, the thermostat all talk together, and they're able to squeeze out the most efficiency from that combination. You can pair a heat pump with an existing furnace, but usually the efficiency is lower. It's often a little noisier. And if you have that existing furnace and you put in the new heat pump, that furnace might be on a different replacement timeline than the new heat pump. And so 5 years later, you might then have to go in and replace that furnace. So generally, because the efficiency is higher and and it allows you to kind of reset the clock on all of your equipment, we usually recommend people going with a full heat pump solution. And I guess one other thing to keep in mind here is a lot of the rebates and incentives do require that you turn off the gas for your heating. And so a full heat pump system is usually actually more cost effective than trying to keep your existing furnace. And I think one other thing that you asked is like, do you have to get rid of gas everywhere else? No. You can tackle the heat pump now. You can keep your gas stove. You can keep your gas water heater. You can deal with those later when the time to replace them comes. So even if you go all electric on heating, that doesn't mean you have to do that everywhere else in your home.
Awesome, thank you. The next question is from Ginger, who is in Napa. She's hoping to use heat pump technology to heat her home. She has a slab foundation and only a gas wall heater. So some rooms have only electric space heaters. She would also like to set up a water heater using a heat pump. So lots going on there.
Yeah. So Ginger, it sounds like in your case, you might also be a great fit for a ductless or mini split type heat pump, especially with that slab foundation. There probably isn't a good way to run ductwork throughout the house. Often the ducts are in the crawl space. You might have an attic that you could. Usually we find if there aren't already ducts and you're okay with having the units on your wall, that a ductless system is the most economical. What that would look like is one of those units in each of your bedrooms, plus like one or two in common areas, serving those spaces. And if you're cost constrained, sometimes you can also skip a bedroom, skip part of your home, and let the temperatures equalize over time. And so like as the system runs, like slowly it'll kind of bleed into other rooms. So that can also be a way to work with that. Heat pump water heaters and heat pump HVAC are generally two distinct projects. You don't necessarily need to consider them both at the same time. There is like a small handful of products on the market that combine both together, but they're usually pretty expensive and complicated, and we don't recommend them for most people. So you can think of those as two separate projects. The new heat pump water heater would be a drop-in replacement for your existing water heater, and then the new ductless mini splits would cover different parts of your home.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The next question is from Silke, sorry if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly, from Sunnyvale. They have radiant floors and a gas condensing boiler, which is for DHW, and a closed loop for radiant heat. If gas boilers are not going to be allowed anymore at some point in time, is there a heat pump for this type of setup and configuration?
Yeah, great question. So this is a little more uncommon setup, but there's a handful of homes. If you're familiar with Eichlers, a lot of those homes in the Bay Area have this type of setup. And so often what we find is the most economical solution in these cases is to just decommission the radiant floor heating and install the mini split heat pumps, same as what we recommended for Ginger. That gets you that room by room control, and it gives you air conditioning, because with a radiant system, there isn't a way to add cooling. You would need a separate system for cooling. Some people are really attached to their radiant floor. They like how it feels, and they don't want to get rid of it. There are a small handful of systems like Harvest Thermal, for example, which will tie in with that radiant loop. But often the piping in the floors is already fairly deteriorated, and in many times just abandoning that in place and doing a mini split solution makes the most sense. But there are some specialty applications for these. They're usually more rare. You'll have more trouble finding a contractor that works with them, and they will be more expensive. But Harvest Thermal would be where I would look if you're really attached to that radiant.
Awesome. Next question is from Ahmed. He has an old furnace and gas water heater. And they've installed an induction stovetop, but we're thinking of maybe a combined system. So is that something that's possible, or is it more complicated than two separate systems?
Yeah, generally this is one of those things that just splitting it up and tackling each as its own project makes the most sense. There's a lot of water heaters now that will basically drop into the existing space of an existing gas water heater. Same with the furnace. There are heat pumps that will drop into the same space as the existing furnace. So usually the most logical option is to just treat each as a separate project. You can do both at the same time, but there's not the systems that try and combine the two into one generally, again, become pretty expensive.
Awesome. So we have another question from Abe. Abe is experiencing drier air since they installed their heat pump. Is this a known issue? And if so, how can people, what can we do about that?
That's a good question, Abe. The way that a heat pump heats your home is a little different than how a traditional furnace heats your home. And with a furnace, you're blasting heat into the house for a brief period of time, and then it shuts off, and then everything is just kind of passively like dropping in temperature until the furnace kicks on again. And so you have very little runtime. With a heat pump HVAC system, you're going to be running that air more constantly, and sometimes that can take some of the humidity out of the air. For most people, this isn't an issue, but sometimes it can be, and so it's definitely worth noting. I think in your case, it might be worth looking into a dedicated whole home humidifier. Sometimes you can install those at the location of the new heat pump system, and it will add some humidity into the air as the air circulates, and that might help you tackle some of those issues. Yeah, for most people, it's not an issue, but I know some people can be more sensitive to that.
Great. Pam has an excellent question. She's wondering if you recommend homeowners do their own load calculations to ensure the contractor is sizing the heat pump properly.
I wish I could say yes here, Pam, but the truth is, to do one of these load calculations properly requires a lot of expertise. And these are one of those things where it's garbage in, garbage out. It's very easy to think that you've done the calculation correctly, but there can be little tiny details in the calculation that can wildly affect the outputs. And so if you have a PhD in engineering and you've been doing HVAC design like as a hobby, like be my guest. But I think for most homeowners, it's simply not feasible to do an accurate calculation themselves. There are some independent companies that will do like load calculations on your behalf as like a consultant, but again, the quality of those can vary quite a bit. So I think this goes back again to finding that contractor that does do that stuff, that is experienced with that, and gives you confidence that their outputs are correct. Yeah.
Pam has a follow-up to that. She's wondering if she should request to see the calculation from the contractor, and probably if so, how do you read that?
Yeah, good question. I think it's well within your rights as a homeowner to request the load calculation. It's also very reasonable that a contractor won't provide that in the quoting stage, because to do these calculations correctly can take several hours. And so most contractors won't make that investment until they've actually had a commitment from you and you're under contract. So I think it would be helpful to insist that that will be a deliverable from them like later on in the process. And most contractors should, if they did do those calculations, provide that detail, and it's within your rights to ask for that before they come into your house and start putting the equipment in. But you probably are unlikely to get one from a contractor in the quoting phase, and that's totally reasonable, just because it takes a lot of work. In terms of how you read that, again, that goes back to expertise, and so your load calculation will have a couple of numbers on it. It will have a total heating load and a total cooling load. So that's how much heating and how much cooling the house needs on the hottest day of the year and on the coldest day of the year. But that's just the start. You also need to consider the equipment and how much capacity the equipment is able to put into the space on the hottest day of the year and the coldest day of the year. And it's not as simple as saying, oh, this load calculation says that my house needs 36,000 BTUs, so I need to install a system rated for 36,000 BTUs, because it's not always that obvious. There's some more calculations there. So I think it will inform you if you're in the right ballpark, but it's again, I'm gonna keep saying this phrase over and over and over again, but it's just like you're probably going to have to delegate some trust here, and so it's important that you trust your partner, because it's going to be a little bit of a leap of faith, but it is a good sign if they're sharing that information with you, and that's part of their process.
Great. Diane has a 850 square feet house and is hoping to raise it several feet to make the existing garage space into an ADU. The old furnace and all of the ductwork will have to be removed down there. Should she assume there will be there will be a need to space between the floors where the ductwork can go, and without ducts, would she need new mini splits on both of the living space areas and the new ADU downstairs?
Yeah, great question. So you should definitely plan around the HVAC system as you're doing this remodel. And I would encourage people, like in this planning stage, if you're planning on doing a larger remodel, get an HVAC contractor involved early, like ideally when the architect still hasn't finalized plans, because I've run into situations where an architect thinks something will be good, and then there's actually not enough space to fit our equipment or the clearances that it needs, and we have to do like some substantial modifications. So the earlier, like in your process, that you involve a contractor, they can kind of guide you there. So yeah, you will need space somewhere, either in the attic or in the crawl space below the house, to run ductwork if you are keeping ducts. And if you don't have that space, yeah, those ductless mini splits can be a great option.
The next question is about ducted versus ductless. Are one of them more efficient than the other, or are they the same in terms of efficiency?
So theoretically, ductless systems are the most efficient. And the reason for that is because a ducted system has to generate heat centrally and distribute heated air throughout the house. Whereas the ducted systems, the heat comes out close to where it's needed, so in the actual bedrooms. And so you don't have all of the energy losses pushing the air through the ducts. However, from a practical standpoint, if you already have ducts, usually it makes the most sense to reuse that existing infrastructure rather than going with a ductless solution. And the reason is because in a medium to large house, the amount of equipment that like each of those indoor units adds cost and adds additional installation labor. There's a lot of work in routing all of the plumbing and electrical to each of those units. And so from a materials and labor standpoint, usually beyond 3 or 4 indoor ductless units, a ductless system will end up being more costly than a ducted system. So generally, I try to advise people, if they have ductwork in decent condition, to reuse that ductwork. You're not going to make up that difference in cost from like operating efficiency over the lifetime of the unit. So it's a bit of a trade-off between your upfront cost and your long-term cost. Even still, like a ducted system ducted systems are quite efficient. For 1 unit of electricity, you're generally getting 4 units of heat into your house, and so they're still really great.
Awesome. That's all the questions that we have right now. So maybe we can do one more if people want to take a moment to write in the chat. And oh, here comes one from Pam. How are you feeling about mixed or dual fuel systems?
Yeah, I mean, look, in other parts of the country, like if you're in Minnesota or you're in Alaska, like by all means, like keep a furnace because it might allow you to install a lower cost heat pump system. Here in California, like we can very easily meet all of the heating needs of a home with an all-electric heat pump system. And when you stack the incentives for cutting your gas, the added efficiency of the all-electric system, and having reset the clock and having all new infrastructure in your home, we think that I think personally that all electric systems are a no-brainer, and that's all that we install with my company, Vayu. You live in Mammoth with propane. Okay. That's a little different. Yeah, Mammoth gets really cold. And so depending on how big your house is, sometimes keeping a fuel source in place can be the most economical way to heat that house. But like again, like there are benefits to going all electric. Like if you can get rid of that propane tank and not have to worry about getting propane deliveries, like that's a win too. So
Abe has a great question about cost. Are there any efforts to reduce cost of equipment and installation? Because, you know, on the high end, 20,000 is pretty high for the average homeowner. So how can we reduce cost?
Totally. Yeah, no, it's a big investment, and it might end up being one of the biggest purchases that you'll make as a homeowner. And so I definitely understand that like cost can be a big barrier for a lot of people. And I wish that these systems were more inexpensive because we could get more of them out there. I will say, like from the front end, like those rebates and incentives do help a lot, and for a lot of people that can reduce the upfront cost. There have been a lot of advancements in heat pump technology over the past couple of years. One little thing is like just recently, a lot of manufacturers have 120 volt heat pumps, and what that means is that heat pump will plug into the same wiring that the old furnace did. And so previously, a lot you would have to run a new dedicated electrical circuit for that heat pump, which would add cost. And now you don't have to do that. So there's a lot of small design features, and I'm really optimistic to see how the manufacturers are working with contractors to like evolve their system. But little changes can make a big difference in how much installation time is needed, and ultimately that late installation labor is the largest piece of the cost that you're seeing. Like the cost of the equipment itself is relatively small compared to the total cost of installation. So I'm optimistic that there's improvements there. But again, I think the flip side to that is like I want to be like transparent. Like these are like $20,000 projects, right? These aren't like $1,000 or $2,000 projects, and sometimes people come in with misaligned expectations and they think it's a $1,000 or $2,000 project, right? Like they are $20,000 projects. You should probably scratch your head and like question it a little bit if a project is significantly lower than that, because it might mean a contractor's cutting corners and you might end up paying more in the long run. So.
Ahmed has a great question asking about high-end heat pumps and whether that justifies the additional 5K or 7K premium.
Yeah, I have some pretty strong opinions on this. I really think that in most cases, you shouldn't focus on brand and you shouldn't focus on getting a high-end heat pump product. And so a lot of heat pumps are actually made by the same manufacturers. And so Midea is a large overseas HVAC manufacturer. They probably make half of the heat pumps in the world, and they'll sell that same equipment to the big brands like Carrier and Bryant, and then they'll also sell that equipment to smaller brands like Cooper and Hunter and Mr. Cool. And that equipment is all like largely identical, sometimes literally down to the nut and bolts. But you're paying a premium for the brand. So the things that I would focus on when I was buying a system is like, I would want a variable speed or inverter system. That's the type of system that will actually be able to adjust the amount of heating or cooling that it puts into your house. And when they're running at partial capacity, which will be most of the year, they'll be even more efficient. And so with the cost of like utility bills can get high, and so it's really important to invest up front in like an efficient system. But you don't need to, like, in my opinion, you don't need to spend the extra for a system from a larger brand. Like there are some brands that had an early lead on these products. So Mitsubishi, for example, was like one of the first players that brought like really efficient heat pumps onto the American market. But most of the other manufacturers have caught on. They're bringing these products to the market. I'd say like that I can barely see a difference in construction and performance and day-to-day use between a fancy brand and a budget brand. And so with my own heat pump installation company, we like actually very rarely install name brand systems. We're often installing smaller, lesser known systems that allow us to get quality installations at a more like high value price point. What I will say is, does a high-end heat pump installer justify an additional 5K premium? And I would say absolutely yes. And so like if you're comparing two contractors installing the same equipment, one is charging more, but they're doing those sizing calculations, they're following best practices during installation, they understand the system, they understand how it works, then it very much can be warranted to spend extra for a different installer.
Awesome. We've got another question from Pam. How do you feel about the manufacturer only honoring warranty if it's an authorized installer?
I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think where Pam might be like nudging towards this is some manufacturers market DIY heat pumps. And so they're aimed more at homeowners. And it's like, if you're handy with a wrench, maybe you can go in and install the heat pump yourself and you don't need a contractor and you can save a lot of money. And the fact is, I've seen a lot of these installations gone wrong and a lot of basic steps being missed, a lot of things miswired, a lot of like connections not torqued correctly and refrigerant leaking out. And so that like those installation steps are so important in getting a good result. And so I can understand why a manufacturer would want to prioritize the warranty for people that have taken their trainings, that understand their equipment, have the right tools, follow the best practices. But yeah, in terms of warranties, like most heat pumps on the market, you're going to be getting like a 10-year manufacturer warranty. So you can rest easy that like that you'll be covered in the long run.
Perfect. I think we're getting to a good, people are popping off in the chat with questions. Love it. So Abe says that he was told a new refrigerant was being required in 2026, which is less polluting but more susceptible to fire. Do you know about the status of this?
Yeah, so this is actually has already taken effect, but there was a refrigerant transition last year. The EPA required a new threshold so that refrigerants are actually a pretty potent greenhouse gas, and so if they leak into the air, like 1 pound of refrigerant can equal like hundreds of pounds of carbon dioxide being released in the atmosphere. So they required new formulations of refrigerant that that did not have as much of a polluting effect. You are right that the newer refrigerants technically have a higher flammability than the older refrigerants that they're replacing, but it's kind of like I've seen videos of people taking a blowtorch to the refrigerant trying to light it on fire and it doesn't catch. And so it's nothing that I would be worried about. I would be more worried about the natural gas coming into your home and being burned inside your fire inside your furnace than the closed loop of the refrigerant that doesn't come in contact with anything that sparks. There are safety precautions in the equipment to even if they detect a leak, they'll automatically shut off. And so it's nothing to be worried about. All of the equipment has transitioned to this new refrigerant already, so I think that's great news because it is like much better for the climate, even if some of it is released.
Awesome.
Okay, well, I think
that we haven't covered, Shreyas. We've covered a lot of ground, but any misconceptions or common questions that we didn't get to that you hear often?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing I can say is like for 99% of California homes, an all-electric heat pump situation will work. Most of the time, it won't require any additional work. A lot of times it will be a drop-in replacement for your existing system. And this can feel like a scary process at the start, but like I mean, say it one last time: find a good partner that you can trust, and help them, let them guide you through this. Again, there's lots of those great resources that we've linked to in here. So definitely check some of those out. I definitely, if you liked what you saw here, I definitely recommend looking at the heat pump guide because it goes into a lot more detail on all of this stuff. We'll be sending out these slides and a recording of this presentation afterwards. So if you didn't take notes, don't worry. You can look back at all of this. And if you ever have any heat pump questions, if you're looking to get a heat pump in the Bay Area and don't know where to start, like here, this is my email. Feel free to reach out anytime. I love guiding people through this journey. And yeah, and I hope that this was valuable for folks and loved all the questions.
We've got a bonus question from Ginger if you want to close on a high note. Okay. Does a mini split need to go straight down to the ground, or can it be installed around the corner from where the inside unit will be?
They can be, the outdoor and indoor units can be in two different parts of the house. And so what you'll find is that they'll run what's called line hide. It looks a lot like gutters, and they will route those refrigerant lines from where the outdoor unit is located to where the indoor unit is located. So depending on your house's specific architecture, you can usually find a situation that works, and they don't have to be exactly in the same spot.
Amazing.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, everyone.